So very excited to see all of you. I'm Sarah Gambito, one of the co-founders of Kundiman. Very excited to be speaking to you all on this conversation with Quiet Before. And so, yeah, maybe just briefly, just go around and you can introduce yourself however you want. And since we're in Zoom world, maybe I'll just say your first name and you can say a few words by way of introduction. Okay, so maybe we'll begin with Kazim.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here to chat with all of you. I am zooming in from Southern California, traditional lands of the Kumeyaay people, commonly and presently called San Diego. I teach at UCSD in the literature department. I'm currently the chair of the literature department. About 17 years ago, I founded Nightboat Books, which is now a, national press. And at the time when I founded Nightboat Books, I was serving on the board of Alice James Books with Sarah Gambito. And this was pre-Kundiman and pre-Nightboat. And so now we've both gone on to create these organizations that have become institutions. So it's one of the things I'm most proud of doing Nightboat. And I'm sure Sarah feels that way about Kundiman too. My most recent, I'm all over the map in terms of what I write. This is my cat. My most recent books are a book of nonfiction, which is about a hydroelectric dam and its impact on an Indigenous community in northern Manitoba. I also just edited a book of selected poems and letters by Shrila Ray. Can't really see the book, but oh, there it is. Who was an Asian American poet who died in 1994. And then my newest book is a YA fantasy novel called The Citadel of Whispers, which is coming out in 2 days from Choose Your Own Adventure.
So exciting.
Yeah. So that's what I'm up to. I don't introduce myself by just saying I'm a poet anymore because there's so many other things that are happening. And Miss, do you mind? Will you let me talk to the people? So that's all I've got. I'm going to see if this little lady will leave me be.
That sounds great. Elda?
Hello, thank you for having me join this evening. Such nice company. I'm coming from Lower Manhattan, the canyon of the financial district. I'm Elda Rotor. My day job, I'm vice president and publisher of Penguin Classics. Been there for 15 years. I've been in book publishing for 25-ish years. I've been a friend and fan of Kundiman for many years. And I'm a poet at heart, too. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Elda. Victory?
Hello, everyone. I have such deep respect for each of you. I'm really, really excited that we're in conversation. I worked in publishing for 7 or 8 years. I started at Little Brown, and then I went freelance, and then I joined in print called One World at Random House that was founded by Chris Jackson. And I was kind of brought in to edit fiction and literary nonfiction. And I was there for 3 years and really loved the people and the books that I worked on there. And then 2 years ago, I left to move to a Zen monastery, help found and train at the Zen monastery. So I'm calling in from there now. I have monks in the background this is our day off. So we're getting up at 4:50 a.m. tomorrow. And we're located in Millerton, New York, which is Schaghticoke and Lenape territory. And yeah, that's it for me. Oh, and I'm also a writer, but secretly.
Yes.
Secretly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, all of you, for being here. So just to frame our time together, again, I just love the idea of adventure and of us kind of just exploring together questions we have about writing, about connecting audiences to writers, about the future of what it means to create the new literary future, and how writers, readers, how we can have a sense of agency in how that articulates itself. So I'll just say, you know, at Kundiman, like a lot of what we do is mentorship, getting the words on the page. And when Nancy and I were talking, I thought it would be so great to explore with all of you how publishing is evolving, how we can have a sense of stake in it. And I'll just say, you know, like Kundiman did a series of Wikipedia kind of hackathons where we found out all these high school and elementary school teachers were Googling Asian American literature for Asian American Heritage Month and just teaching from this very impoverished, poorly written, carelessly written entry in Wikipedia. And so activating students and writers and scholars from all over the country to really build into that, and recognizing that that was like a kind of fulcrum of how we could make a difference, a material difference in how people were connecting to Asian American literature and Asian American writers. And I loved what Nancy was saying. It's like, so not only, you know, your professional take, but maybe even more interestingly, like your personal stake or take or thoughts about, you know, what you've observed and what your advice might be to writers that are coming up. Like I'll just say one more thing, and then I really just want to open it up. I've noticed, right, that sometimes writers of color, Asian Americans, will publish a book and then it's reviewed by a white reviewer who has zero idea, who really missed the boat at all. And the problem, right, is that often these reviews are at big mainstream publications, and it has a material effect on, you know, how the book can do, and even if the book can be in print. So these are, you know, like when I say this is a personal, I'm just curious about how we can, you know, work to open lines of how we can diversify. But I want to know your questions too, and what you're wondering about, and maybe we can all just see a little better together. And what I'll say too, in terms of our conversation, I just feel like let's just play with it. Like we might be done like in like an hour, or like just, you know, let's just see like what comes up. I'm imagining that we're I think, you know, like at a cafe or something, and we're drinking like a fall beverage, and we're just really curious for each other. So that's how I'm thinking about it. So I'm going to stop talking, and anyone like, yeah, what's coming up for you? What thoughts do you have?
So many, but I figure if we're just sitting around the table chatting with a fall beverage, I'll just like throw in one or two, and then just kind of hear from everybody. But while you were talking, I was thinking one of the things that I think that one of the three of the interventions that Kundiman made when it first started was, first of all, it provided a place for people to come into the workshop with all other Asian American writers, which was like fully revolutionary at the time. And I do think it's harder maybe, or challenging to imagine what it was like when there were not that volume of Asian American writers to be even read. Because I came to the summer retreat in 2006, I think, which was it was the second one. And in my class alone, and that Arthur was teaching and John Pineda was teaching too, so there were two other classes. This was the poetry. I think it was only poetry then. And only my 12 people were like Margaret Rhee, Sally Wen Mao, Soham Patel, Cindy King. Do you know what I mean? Like more people than that too. I just can't think of everybody. Almost every single person has, Neil Aitken was in that group. They've all gone on to publish books, and Mao Ching-in Chan was in that group. Multiple books. They're professors now. So that's how the landscape, starts changing historically year after year as it builds. But the second intervention that was happening, of course, was like a little bit later with the Kundiman Prize, where you were actually publishing that work. And then the institutions started to build a little bit. Alice James became a great supporter. And then who is it? It's Tupelo now who does it. Is it still happening, the Kundiman Prize?
It's on hiatus right now.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that those were really structurally important. And then the third one was more unofficial. At least at the time, it wasn't an actual Kundiman program, but you were hosting these kind of, I don't know, salons or something, but they weren't reading salons, they were writing salons. You would give a prompt or something, you just gather at someone's apartment. There'd be 10 or 12 people in Manhattan. This is when I lived in New York, And I think it was just a way of creating that community that it's not solely a reading community where the end goal is to publish a book or the end goal is to win a fellowship. But it's like the journey is the goal. Like the goal is to be a writer and the goal is to get the writing done. And it was a way of like that privileging of that, I think to me now is still the most important thing.
Mm.
The book is just like, it's like a trace element of what the real journey was, which was, the writing of all that work. She's going to say goodbye again. She might come back.
I love that. Like, it reminds me of, I was reading the preface of one of Fred Moten's books, and he said, this book is really just 20 years of conversation with this amazing person that he was writing the book with. And the book is actually, the way he was positive, it was like kind of an afterthought. Like he was like, the 20 years of conversation are really, the gift here. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kazim. I think there's a lot of spectacular things that all of a sudden become possible when we start to think together about what we hope for, what isn't there yet. And I think like little things like just gathering together and writing together, just all of us going on Wikipedia and trying to fix things. And then I was talking to Kyle at Kundiman, and I was like, what if, there's a book that we want everyone to read, and then we just all went on Amazon and just reviewed it. And then she's like, maybe that works. It's like, my brain doesn't like work like that. Like I started thinking about, I was just like, oh, I'll send my poems to whatever is contests are, but I think like publishing is really changing. There's a lot of ways that people can find entree, but then also a lot of it is opaque. And Elda, you and I have had really, startling conversations about what you've seen and, what's possible. And, but yeah, I think, so I'm gonna hang back with my imaginary cinnamon cocoa and see what else is sort of, ricocheting around for any of you.
I'll speak about, I love the hackathon Wikipedia activities. I think that's brilliant because you're right. I think there's definitely communities that go to the quickest resource and assume that that's it. And if they don't find, representation of the writers they should, then they're not going to go any deeper. I would say from the publishing side, it's the time to be as squeaky as possible. But I think part of my job is to sustain that in-house in different ways and be mindful of making sure that people's interest right now, maybe self-awareness, maybe insecurity, isn't temporary. And, for example, some books, people might think that maybe racism books are going to be just trending for these few years, right? And my position in Penguin Classics, I'm always looking for the books that are going to last, and always paying attention to what were those books that last, and why do people want to teach them again, or why do people want to go back to these discussions again? And hopefully editors that are looking for frontlist books, new books in hardcover, paperback, will sign up books that they know are going to be timeless. They're timely and timeless. So thinking of racism as only something that we're handling now is like ridiculous, because there's a whole history of books that people teach and talk about. So it's just like the next chapter of looking at those types of books. So I think that I try to be as supportive and subversive as I possibly can at work by making strategic recommendations for a variety of things and encouraging editors who might feel insecure or self-aware, like, I'm not sure if I know how to do this right, encourage them, because it's all about the love of the book. If you're going to find writers, they're going to have great work that you're going to connect to. And if there are parts of the book or the author's background that you don't connect to, you have to figure out how to get confident about that and learn and be humble about it and take your skill as an editor and still continue to pursue those books. I don't mean to digress, but I feel like the Wikipedia thing reminds me of the advice I always give is to think that it's not just making sure that we publish more Asian American writers, but hire Asian American people for all varieties of labor. So book designers, marketers, pick the reviewers. Like if you had a choice of a book to market, pick the ones that don't get the spotlight that much. If you're a marketing assistant, you have incredible power. If you're supposed to figure out what to post that week on your imprint Twitter, you can decide. I mean, there'll be some references by other people to maybe pick obvious bestsellers, but I just feel like those small pieces of being subversive can have tremendous power.
Yeah, I think that if I could just hop one in really quickly, you point to something that it hurts us if we buy into this kind of notion of merit, like the best books are the ones that get all the attention, when we know that is absolutely not true. As small press publishers and not so small press publishers, it's the books that get resources behind them and the personal connections that get made with publicists and venues and booksellers. And if you're an independent press like Nightboat, the amount of time we spend reaching out to independent bookstores and trying to get the books reviewed. And I'll just use an example, Ocean Vuong's book last year was so huge, tremendously, this beautiful kind of poetic prose narrative that quivered between nonfiction and fiction, but it very much a traditional, I'm sure you all know, traditional Vietnamese prose form that other writers have used, including, of course, Marguerite Duras, the French colonizer writer, used that form for The Lover, her famous book, The Lover. And there's an incredible Canadian Vietnamese novelist who you may know named Kim Thuy, who's published 4 or 5 books at this point. She has a new book coming out in October. It's brilliant work, but somehow the attention that's given to one book or one writer, it doesn't always translate to the community to say like, wow, Ocean's book was amazing. And it was, of course, but like, who are the other Vietnamese writers who are out there and what are they doing? Like, it's not occurring to any of the mainstream, maybe Asian American critics to ask those questions. And so it does behoove us to understand that this is not like, it's not a process of like, just, what I said, merit. It's not just that these books that are just great and they just appear out of nowhere and then it's on everyone's minds. There's a lot of advanced work that goes behind it. And so we have to, it's difficult in a way because it means you have to put in the hours, you have to put in the time, you have to put in the work. What we're talking about, building an organization or like, promoting those writers, it sucks a little bit because we can't just sit around and say, eventually if the writing's good, first of all, the writing will get done in the first place, which is absolutely not true, especially because of all the social pressures in our community around not wasting our lives and this foolish work. You want to major in what now? And then furthermore, that if the writing gets done, if it's good, it will find a publisher. And if it finds a publisher and it's good, it will get out there. None of that is true in the real world.
So what is a writer to do? Like, how do you?
It's work. I hate to say it. It's not, I don't think there's like, this is my opinion, I don't mean one alone should burn oneself out trying to, put out the fires of the universe. But I do think there's you have to make a commitment, and you get in there and you put in the time and you do the work. Ideally, you're developing people, because I don't think it's healthy. We too need a break from what we're doing, and to do other things and to focus on our own writing and, all of what is happening, as Victory, just talked about, leaving publishing after however many years, doing a lot of good work and bringing a lot of writers into that imprint, writers of color, including one of my very first undergraduate students who I taught when she was a young lass of 20, Danielle Geller, who became one of Victory's writers at One World. So it's real, it's important work, but it is work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, yes, my colleague Nicole counts as Danielle Geller's editor, and that book is amazing. It's amazing.
I thought you were an editor, okay.
Yeah. I want to say, I think a lot about what is the point of being published. And like, I think in publishing and kind of in the general discourse, it's assumed that the best thing that could happen to you is to get a major book deal with a commercial publisher and to sell hundreds of thousands of copies and get reviewed in all the major publications and win prizes. And I think all of that is very important in terms of the material resources that you receive and the opportunities that you receive. But on a deeper level, I'm not convinced that is that is the dream. I've seen how that can actually cause a lot of suffering, a lot of anxiety, a lot of inability to write, just the effect that can have on someone's writing process. And I just question it. The other thing I question is kind of the push to diversify, which I also think is important. It's important that we have people of color in every kind of stage of the publishing process, but also that in my experience, a lot of the people who end up in those positions are very unhappy because they're stuck in a process that is inherently shaped by white supremacy and capitalism. And so it's a soul crushing, in my experience, it's often a soul crushing environment to work in. And it's one in which you feel like you're fighting, you're sitting in a cubicle. I mean, not anymore. A lot of people are now working remotely, which is great. But I just question, when I left, a lot of people were really upset because they said, there are so few people of color in this industry. How can you leave? You have a responsibility to do this. And I really felt just a sense of we have a responsibility to be happy, to do work that brings us joy and to build alternative models. I'm really curious. I think that's something that Kundiman does, is building a model of writing that's a community model that actually goes directly against the individualist model of writing, that you're somehow alone and you become this solo superstar. And I'm curious about Nightboat books and what kind of your model around working is that's different from this, that's different from a model that I think is just, it feels poisonous to me. And I feel there's people who are doing the good work. I really want to shout out Chris Jackson and Nicole Counts, my two colleagues who continue to work at One World, who every day fight for their writers, who are publishing amazing books that are changing public consciousness. And also, that it's not that it's really hard. And so I just question, is there a different way? Yeah.
Kazim, I wonder if you can speak to Victory's question about how at Nightboat you how maybe you operate differently than sort of the bigger commercial press, like, and I'll say one thing, like, I remember when you first started talking about Nightboat, you were bringing in, and you continue to bring in writers that time has forgotten, and you're like, no, I'm going to bring them back. And it was a real beautiful act of recovery and of illustrating our past so that we can better understand our future. But in terms of the small press world, how is that working in a way that feels that it's not hewing to the kind of white supremacist ways of interaction and working and bottom dollar profit stuff?
Well, when we started the press in the very beginning, it was actually around doing reprints of writers from the experimental and innovative tradition whose work had fallen out of print. That was the beginning of Nightboat. And specifically, we focused on Fanny Howe's work, and we were reprinting a couple of her books. And then the second project was Mi Kim's book, Dora, which was an incredibly important book when it came out in 1998. Hugely important. I mean, most people know her first book, Under Flag. Every single one of her books is important, of course, but she did 2 books in between. So people know Under Flag and then they know Commons. She did 2 books in between. One of them was called The Bounty, published by Chax Press in Tucson, Arizona. And then the other was Dura. And that book was really the first generation of like younger, so I shouldn't say the first, it's the second generation of Asian American critics like Xian Gai and Stephen Sohn and others, Joe Ponce and others. They wrote about that book because it was so important, but because Sun and Moon went out of business, it was actually out of print. So it was this sort of weird situation of this book that was really important to people on the critical landscape, but nobody could get a copy of. So that's how we actually started. Then we decided that we wanted to start publishing contemporary poetry, but we still operated on the sort of merit concept, even though it was books that we wanted to bring from the innovative and experimental community. So we were only doing 1 a year. And it just felt like the first several books, they were great. I love them, but we didn't have a lot of diversity in the list. And there was a certain moment where we felt like, okay, if we really want to make this a dynamic and interesting list, we're going to have to get strategic about who we want to publish. But of course, publishing a book it's an incredibly important step. But like I said, it's the end stage of this long process. And so, we were not in the business of like, say, running a conference or, running workshops or something like that. Some publishers do that though. But what we did do was start paying a lot of closer attention to the writers that we admired and wanted to see work from and try to develop, and then really create a robust editorial process that was based on the Alice James editorial process, where we would connect one-on-one outside, writers to really get a process. And so I think we really stepped it up. I mean, we identified that we wanted to diversify our list and publish more writers of color, queer writers, trans writers, and the other thing that we did is we started to publish actual anthologies. So we did an anthology of LGBTQ people of color, and then out of that anthology came several people whose books we're now publishing, and we did an anthology of trans and genderqueer writers. So same thing, we published books by people who were in the anthology to begin with. So I don't know, it's just been an ongoing mission to publish the best of what's out there with experimental and innovative literature, but also to be very conscious of the fact that those marginal voices, I think especially Asian American voices, who are doing something that's really formally innovative or like off the grain a little bit. I mean, I think those are the voices that have been even more marginalized, even within Asian American literature. And so it's exciting to kind of give voice. So some of the writers that we've published very recently are, we did Aditi Machado's book and Divya Victor's and Muriel Liang's book in recent years. And then forthcoming next year will be from Wo Chan. We're doing Wo Chan's first book. So there's like a lot of exciting things coming down the pike from Nightboat. And I think it's really, really about a very active editorial vision and really thinking like, you can't just wait for something to come over we did Marwa Halal's invasive species as well. That was in the last 2 or 3 years. None of these, some of these books came in through the pile, but then we had to go in and see the name and think, okay, that is a very interesting person. They're out there, they're doing good work. And let's prioritize looking at that manuscript and really thinking, and then let's work with that person to bring it, to get it ready to develop it. So that's happened with several writers too, where the book might come in and if you just look at it in the whole pile, you might think like, oh, well, okay, maybe they'll send it back in 2 years. But instead, I think that's how you might think in traditional publishing. And you might send it back with a note saying like, hey, this was great. This came close. Think of us again. I'm sure many of us have gotten notes like that. But this is one step further. It's like, hey, this was a very interesting book. I have some thoughts. Here's what I think. Do you want to work on this book? If you want to work on it with me, then we could shoot for doing this in 2 years or 3 years. Like just investing that. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, Victory, what you might be talking about, which is when you are a small press, you have that, you are able to be that nimble and do that work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's interesting to talk about these different modes of working and trafficking, a larger presses, smaller presses, micro presses, right? Victory, as you were talking, and Kazim, maybe it's just in my mind when you told me you were chair. Did you guys watch The Chair? Like when
Victory, when you mad about it though. I didn't like it. I like Ji Yoon. I feel for her, but I didn't like that show. I thought Sandra Oh was great. I mean, of course, but I mean,
yes, I'm so with you. I want to marry Sandra Oh, like tomorrow. I would marry her any day.
Sabotaged by everyone who claims to care about her, including that monster of a daughter.
I thought that the tropes that Victory you were mentioning, I thought was in The Chair. This idea of this woman who gets crushed under the wheels of something that seems utterly implacable. And then to also say, and I agree with you, I question it as well. It's like, what does it mean to connect? What does it mean to publish? What does it mean to be seen? Because I think that's what I try to tell my students. It's like, publishing is just a dialogue, right? With people you care about, that you're interested in. And it's very, I think, surprising to them, because I think this sort of, since one is little, your Cinderella story of getting swept up into the like millions of dollars of like whatever, but to really think about what does it mean to succeed. And you know what, I'm just going off the rails a little bit. I'm just thinking about what you were saying about yoga and about Zen. And I actually really like Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones, like her book on, which is connected to meditation. Like I'm really into that. And I'm just like a kind of new yogi person, but like, okay, I'm going off the rail. I'm just gonna, okay. Like what I like about yoga, right, is that you have to show up to the mat, right? Like, it's like you succeeded. Like I remember having to always go into child's pose and being so embarrassed. I mean, New York, you know what I mean? And these crazy Lululemon freaking people, right? And I'd be like, oh my God, like I felt humiliated. I was like in child's pose and I was crying. And I told the teacher, I was like, I feel humiliated that I'm in child's pose. And she was like, no, that's a sacred pose. She was like, you're humbling yourself before your practice. You're not. And I was like, oh my God. And like this thing about that, you can feel enlivened. You can feel like you're a success. Like if sometimes I just sit on my mat and like, I might just do like a couple things, but I don't feel like, I feel like I see a lot of emerging writers feeling like, how can I ever feel seen or ever feel, I was talking to an editor at a really well-known literary magazine. She was saying they get over 1,000 poems a month to be published, right? And it's like, so, you know, to find, sorry, go ahead, Kazim.
No, it might take it in a different direction. I was just going to say, I do not envy the pressure that younger writers, I mean, I hear it from people that I'm mentoring and my students as well. I do not envy the pressure they feel towards whatever the notion of success is, whatever the current metric notion of success is. It is far beyond any pressure that we ever felt. I mean, there was no such thing as Twitter when we were there, you know, there was barely Facebook. There was barely email, frankly. You know, it was just like a whole different situation. And your book sold like 400 copies. It was solid, you know, everyone felt like pretty okay about that. So I don't know. I think I just, in general, I feel like I want to register that. Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people worked really hard to make it happen, which is to bring poetry out of the margins and into like more of the mainstream. But the price of that is like pretty crazy. You know, I feel like, you know, people are going nuts about like whatever they got to do to like, you know, promote their new book, or, you know, it's just, it seems exhausting to me from the outside. I'm sure it's even more exhausting on the inside.
Thank you for saying, yeah, thank you for saying that, Kazim. Yeah, I feel like maybe this is what's exciting about a conversation like this. I think for emerging writers who look around and feel like they just like want to crawl back into the cubbyhole, it's like, how can we give them a sense of agency? I mean, I was talking to my class yesterday, and I know people have a lot of stuff to say about her, but I'm kind of like, it's great. Rupi Kaur. I'm just like, it's great. I think she's this like woman of color, Canadian, like great. I just, you know, she's drawing flowers and women, you know, like she's breaking up with people and falling. I think it's like a woman of color, like finding an audience. But I do think it's scary when people are like, well, I want to be like her. And what you were saying, Victoria, it's like quite like, how can we articulate a richer sense of being a success as a writer, right? That doesn't set people up to fail. And does that make sense, everyone?
Well, it is what and who are you writing for, and what is your goal as a writer, and what is your intention? And it's perfectly acceptable for your intention to be to make a living and to support your family and to support yourself. I mean, I think it's 100% okay. I'm going to go out on a limb and say there are surer paths to that than poetry. Or experimental writing, and that those other paths are totally fine, and it is what it is, basically. You know, my YA book is already, it's not even out yet. It'll be out in 2 days. It's already my best-selling book after 20 years of publishing what I think of as important and well-written books. You know what I mean? Like, what is it that you want? Be careful what you wish for, in other words. You know,
yeah, to add to that too, I would say that advice that I give authors of mine who are alive, because I also acquire books that are outside of Penguin Classics, is to be aware that, you know, writing your book is like being with, you know, your baby for like one life, but then when the book is published, it's a whole other life. And people will come to you with their interpretation of what you wrote. You know, I've seen my authors politely listen to other people in audiences tell them what their memoir is really about. And that's okay, because you're giving your work to the public, right? And I think the best way to go about it is to be open to that dialogue that those readers have with your work, and knowing that it probably won't match what you thought your work was when you first like submitted it to your editor. And that's okay. There's like the difference between, there is a difference between being a writer and deciding that you want to learn or experience the business of publishing. They're not always the perfect marriage. And, you know, Victory, you were saying that you've observed how that affects your authors. You know, thick-skinned and everything, from reviews to how the marketing team wants to work with you. And basically that's sort of an undoing of who you think you are as a person, because they're going to train you to communicate or think of ways to promote your book. On the other hand, it's, in an ideal situation, you have allies that understand what you want to do. I mean, that would be my ideal situation, that there are people within the book publishing environment, and they don't have to necessarily be POC publishing folks, but people who are like, wait, let's just listen to who the author believes is the audience. And maybe because we don't know this audience, we'll need to learn how to reach different people. I think there's some frustration, certainly, where particularly POC authors will come into and meet their teams and then say, they don't get me at all. They don't get my book, or that's not the book that I published. So there's a dialogue that has to be worked out. But it's important to speak up for yourself, but also understand that it isn't what you wrote. It just it changes.
Yeah, it's important to
I'm curious to know, Elda, from you, if you have, like, you know, you were talking about wanting to bring in people to be designers and marketing people to write the copy about the books and stuff like that. I mean, do you see changes in publishing? I mean, certainly One World is like one example of an imprint that seems to me, from the outside, not knowing very much about it, like a cutting edge of some of this stuff. But, you know, is the industry changing in any way, or what can we do to support that?
I think that Victory and Victory's colleagues at One World are an example of of success. The way I see success, people are so admire and respect that list of authors and the work that's being done. But I also, and I've said this in meetings, One World shouldn't be doing all this work. One World is like one imprint. We should compete with One World. We should compete with a lot of the really strong, maybe newer imprints who have been giving space to writers that maybe have been shut out in the past. It's slow. I think, you know, everyone has this on their agenda to change, but it can be slow. And you have to kind of empower and encourage people on every individual level how to make progress in these decisions that they can make from day to day, while at the same time making the corporation accountable. And so there are different speeds to that. Some are glacial, some are agile. And then I'm exhausted on the totally other side, because if you are willing to step up and do the extra volunteer work, you're on a DEI committee or volunteering. And I have to say, some of my favorite people I've ever worked with in publishing, I've only met through those committees, and I'm so inspired by their work. But they're also, you know, at some level exhausted. I don't know when it's going to be everybody's job, but at this point, I mean, the front line are the people who really are committed. A lot of them are junior people. A lot of them are POCs. And, you know, I'm worried about their exhaustion level.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I feel like when you said, I wonder when it will be everyone's job, like, I don't know, but at the moment, like, everyone can't be trusted with this work. That's the unfortunate part, is that, you know, to really do it and do it properly, it still lies with those of us who are directly impacted, basically.
Thank you for bringing.
Yeah, I would.
Oh, go ahead, Victory. Go ahead.
I would just say that one thing that was so wonderful about working in an imprint that was not just all people of color, but people of color who had a shared vision to publish subversive work. So it wasn't just like there was actually like a focus to it as well, was that, you know, I thought a lot about at the time of what Toni Morrison says about how one of the main functions of racism is distraction. So you have to like do all this stuff to just like justify that your work even matters. Like someone says you have no history, you have to pull that up. Someone says you have no art and you have to like demonstrate that. And one thing that was really fun about the process was, because before I went to One World, my idea was like, well, if I went to like an all like POC press, like it would just be easy. And it turns out it wasn't easy. It was just we got to do the work that's really fun and that really mattered. So the work wasn't like justifying to people that this book should exist. The work was like, is this the right like narrative structure for the book? Like, let's really like get into it. Like, what is this character doing? And like, what is this kind of like thing that you're sneaking in that feels like, you know, you're kind of playing on something, and I'm not gonna like let you get away with that. Like there's basically like a more honest dialogue that I think is possible, and a more kind of like challenging environment. Like I think that was one thing that we always brought to the writers that we wanted to work with, is like, do you really want to like get into this kind of like what Kazim was describing, like a really in-depth editorial process where you're like with someone and you deeply, deeply care and are deeply invested in their work, to the point that you're not just going to publish it because like, oh great, I like got a POC writer and I'm just going to like publish this and like have this be my like kind of like token person, or like a, you know, this is like, I don't understand it, so like I'll just like let it be just the way it is, like to really get into it. And I think that's the work that I really want to continue to see happening in publishing. Like yeah, I want to see people like getting into it and challenging each other. And that was one of the really, really fun things about working on Minor Feelings with Kathy Park Hong, was that like, she's the daughter of Korean immigrants. I'm a mixed race child. I'm a fourth generation Japanese American. We have completely different experiences of being Asian American. And so then a real dialogue is possible, because, you know, I don't have to just be like, well, you're the expert on Asian American experience, so like, I'm not going to say anything.
Who is this you're referring to?
Sorry, what?
Who is it you're referring to?
The author?
Yeah.
Kathy Park Hong.
Oh, Kathy. Okay.
Yeah.
I missed it when you said her name. Okay.
Oh yeah. So that was really fun. And then her book was reviewed by Gia Tolentino at the New Yorker, and Gia had her own take on the book too. And so it was like really fun to see Asian American like discourse around a book that's not, you know, it's not the definitive book of the Asian American experience. It's just a book that sparks conversation, and that can that was formed out of like a real rigorous relationship, which is, yeah, as you said, Sarah, I think is all about relationship.
You know, I really love this idea of like pushing each other, deepening ideas of representation and what can be possible. And I'm struck by like your question, Kazim, like how can we support that? Like how can, and I really, you know, real talk, I'm curious what you think. It's like, I was talking again to a friend who teaches publishing, and she was like, no, it's actually a really good time for BIPOC, you know, young people to get into publishing. And I mean, I'm many years removed from it, but I said, I remember when I moved to New York, I was like, I cannot live on an assistant's salary. And so I said, so yes, if they want BIPOC people to come, can they pay them? Because, you know, you often do not have you know, a place to land. Like, you know, you don't have somebody like supplementing your rent or what have you. Like, have you all seen a shift in compensation, and which would allow more people to enter the business? I'm curious.
I think it still doesn't pay enough. It's hard. Book publishing was made, I don't know, just for a different time or different type of person who could afford living. I'll just be super honest. I lived at home, like rent controlled, Filipina, New Yorker, like that's how I stayed in book publishing. And I know that most of the younger folks are just, they've struggled and they're frustrated. And a lot of my younger colleagues that worked with me directly, not many of them have stayed in book publishing. I don't want to sound like depressing about it, but they were competitive people. They either went to school or they went to, tech places. So it's a hard thing, which I don't know how to fix, but I'd have to say, if you have a great experience in book publishing, it's because you're doing meaningful work. If you can, like I can say, and I know I'm deeply lucky. I've learned so much from the authors I've worked with and the scholars I've worked with through classics, and that just is so worth it to me. But I've had a situation where I'm able to stay in book publishing as long as I have. But I don't know. I think the industry has to figure itself out. Like, how are we going to draw people who don't have that financial support ready, or also culturally? Mm-hmm. I'm still not a doctor, according to my dad. So it's not like you find I think when I talked to some Dima summer fellows, I think they were high schoolers. I said, one of the things I learned early on, or actually, to be frank, like maybe last year, is like you have to have your own family of supporters that know what you do for a living, are excited about it, and they're not necessarily your relatives, but people that believe in you, and find those mentors, because it's really sort of devastating to find out, like, maybe your parents won't ever understand what you want to do, or they're not excited about you being book publishing, but then you'll be okay with that if you have a family of people like Kundiman who understand you.
Yeah, I love that. And to take the metaphor another step, a friend of mine said, you should have your own board of directors. Like, just people you can consult and say, hey, is this a good idea? Or what do you think about this? And
cool, raise money for you.
I just
love that, having your own board of directors.
Victory, go ahead.
I really feel, okay, I just really feel for young people who want to be in publishing, who then get to publishing. And then what you learn is that every part of it is a competition, because this is a white supremacist structure, right? So there's like, as an editor, you are not only in competition with editors at other imprints, you're in competition with editors at your own imprint, because you have to get submissions to you. And I think a lot of people don't know this. Like, so me, Chris, and Nicole, we're technically in competition with each other when we're at this imprint, in that an agent can only submit a book to one editor at an imprint. So you have to position yourself as like, I want this, I'm the kind of person for this book, like I'm really good at this, this is my interest. And ideally you have an imprint where everyone's interests are so, specific that there's no overlap, but that doesn't happen, especially with literary fiction. And so the whole system is actually designed for you to feel insecure, to have to put yourself above other people in order to get ahead. And so it actually interferes with you creating a community experience that's actually nurturing and satisfying and feels nourishing. Like, it just feels like you are fighting all the time, and that you're constantly evaluating your status. Like, people, you're listed on Publishers Marketplace from the time you first acquire one book, and people will compare that to other editors at your imprint who are also, how many books have you acquired? Which books have been bestsellers? Which have been prize winners? And so there's just like it's just a whole thing that's like, it does require that you seek that community elsewhere. And there are only certain people who are able to kind of withstand that competitive environment. And I just don't wish that for anyone. I just find that extremely unhealthy. And I find it detrimental actually to doing creative work, to be that concerned with your own reputation, with your own status. in relationship to other people that you should be working with and learning from. And ideally that does happen, but it's against the structure. Like that only happens as an intervention to a structure that is pushing you to be in competition with everyone around you.
I did not know that. Like, I'm like quaking inside because I think you're right. Like, these are diametrically opposed forces. And I'm curious, like, for any of you, like, what can be done to like break that cycle or to like circumvent it, or just how can, like, to think about new structures that might be possible? Like, what can be done? Like, I'm curious about what just immediately occurs to you, because that is inherently, yes, a white supremacist through and through way of interaction. So yeah, I don't know what occurs to you about how can we.
I don't have a solution for it. Victory's really laying it out, and it's true. Like, I don't work in the area that Victory had in terms of literary fiction in particular, but I get nervous for my own colleagues when I can count how many editors are supposed to acquire literary fiction. And, they all have distinct interests, but yet they can all go for the same proposal if they wanted to. My answer only that I know that I've tried to do on a day-to-day basis, and I make that decision myself, like, where I'm like, I'm too busy, but I'm going to go reach out, is I feel very strongly about mentoring, because otherwise you feel like you're alone and you feel like no one's going to have your back in a meeting, or you might say something unpopular, or you thought that this project was exciting, but nobody is nodding or no one is paying attention to you. Just like, if you feel like and obviously, like, you believe in these people, right? That you just have to make the extra effort, especially with young people, like, to say, like, I see you. And I'll just tell you, as much as I've experienced, I won't say I know all the answers, but I'm just letting you know, I see you. I think that how you pitched that proposal, or the fact that you looked for that project, is really cool. And I learned something, and what are we going to do next? And if I have any kind of little tidbit of, I would be like, you should send that to this person in sales, and you should send that to that person in marketing, and tell them why you're excited. Because sometimes people don't show interest because it's a world, or they just don't have the knowledge. So you just find people, like, just sort of gather information on how to build a case. And I know this all sounds exhausting, but you kind of have to do it, find other people that can support what you want to do. Anyway, I'd say, like, mentoring is something I hope that people step up and do.
Yeah, when I was in publishing, we had an editor support group. That was really, really sweet. And we would just get together and just like just like vent about, I was in this cover meeting and like the person wants to put like, a mango on the cover because it's by like an Indian American author, like just the most everyday banal ridiculousness. And you just have a little community and but the thing is that because you're spending so much time in this environment, there's so little room to think about what is an alternative way to do this. Like, all of your energy is kind of being sucked up into just surviving this very competitive environment. So I'm very curious too. Like, I really feel there has to be a different way. There has to be a way in which the actual work itself is as important and nourishing and creative and subversive as the work that's being published. I think that would be my ideal. And I don't know what that is, really. I mean, I think small presses have like interesting, like, ability to create different kinds of environments because you're not in as much of this like hyper competitive structure, but I don't know. I really don't know. I want to find out.
What I remember being like a 16, 17-year-old kid in Buffalo, New York, which is where I grew up. And then I went back there in my 20s. So then I went away to college, and then I organized for many years. And then after I finished my organizing career, I moved back to Buffalo. And both times that I lived in Buffalo, that was in my teens to early 20s. And then in my late 20s, I was involved in the literary scene there. And me and everyone I knew, our goals were like, to read in the reading series around town, to publish our work in little chapbooks, and be in the like journals that people were doing in Buffalo. Nobody gave a twig about, a national reputation or publishing a book with so-and-so or so-and-so. We knew what White Pine Press was because that was the one press that was sort of the book publisher that was the guy lived in Buffalo. So everyone knew what that was. But we knew we couldn't publish there because they were publishing national writers. But I think about that environment like that, the notion of the microclimate for literature, the notion of a regional literature, and writers that support each other. There are places it happens, like, Minneapolis is like that. When I went there for some symposium at University of Minnesota, and then we went out for dinner with a bunch of people, and people were like, oh yeah, that's Juliet Patterson, that's Mark Nowak, that's Heidi Erdrich, that's so-and-so, all these different people. They were just there at the after party, and I think that might be the thing, that might be the wave of the future, in terms of like building and to have more satisfaction as a writer, to be like, I don't need to have a bestseller list on this national bestseller or be published by one of those 6 presses, whoever they are that everyone wants to be published by, but rather that my work is getting out in the community that I actually live in, and that I have connections with the writers here, and that we have these like every Saturday night at, what was it called, that bar in Buffalo that we always used to do the events at? My memory's gone. Rust Belt was the name of a bookstore, and there was a series there that we would go to. Like, what if those were the goals? And those are the most important things, I'm not saying this flippantly. I know there's like,
no.
People think like there's a living to be made, and I have to get a, academic position, I have to get tenure, I have to do this, I have to do that. But once again, those considerations are not actually about the writing itself. And so obviously I'm a tenured professor now, so it's like horribly easy for me to say, give up all of that. But I don't wonder about if I wouldn't be happier now anyways. I live in San Diego, so let me just publish here and read here. And, the rest of it is, it's fictional anyways. Now we're all on the other side of screens. We don't even get to see each other in person, as if we're going to go back to normal sometime soon. Everyone is still out to lunch on that question, I think. I mean, it's just, I'm looking forward to that. Bruno Latour's new book is called After the Lockdown. And it's basically like, that was the beginning, not the ending. That was the beginning. So
I really love that idea of micro kind of climate, micro like ecosystem. It reminds me of Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. And she talks about like as an antidote to how we are all being buffeted by this attention economy, that an antidote to that is being emplaced, is knowing who your neighbors are. It's feeling like you're a part of something bigger and larger and ancient. And I want to shout out this amazing reading series. I think it's online now, but the Jackson Heights reading series. You know what? It's all people, like largely a lot of people from the neighborhood. They just know each other, and they're like, oh, how's your mom? Or how's your, like, and they live together, and they host writers. And I like the idea of us reframing and reclaiming what success is. And that's a lot of what we try to do at Kundiman. Also, it's like what you said, Victory, it's like, what actually do you want, rather than what have you just imbibed, like through the sort of, I don't know, this difficult white supremacist society. I was at AWP, and I don't know, somebody was like, oh, somebody got the Frost Fellowship, and oh, somebody got I think it was like 2016, like, and like, I was like, the world is like falling apart. And it's like everyone, it's like, what happens when writers are, like pecking for like these tiny, tiny little crumbs when, I don't know, when we need each other so much, we need each other's words so much. Yes, that sounds good. Just in the chat. I think I'm winding down though. Like, I feel like this idea of how do we imagine something that does feel good, that does feel joy-filled, and maybe starting small, like Kazim said, and feeling seen, allowing yourself to feel seen. Like, I know, I don't know, we probably have all of us have friends, like, I have a friend, like, no matter how many accolades or awards she won, it was never enough. Never. She was reading and it was just, she could not. And then what has happened, right? And how can we redirect and correct so that, I don't know, we can all live with a little more joy. Okay, so I don't know, like, what else, like, sort of final thoughts, ideas, like, what else is coming up for you?
I love theirs. Back in the day, I don't know if they're still around, but there was an organization called the Sub Press Collective.
Yes.
Do you remember?
I remember.
They each committed some amount of money, like, I think it was like 1/7 of one paycheck or something. They figured out some model. And then you got to choose a book to publish. You yourself chose a book that would then get paid for. And I mean, this is how Pragita Sharma's first book got published. It was through Subpress. This is how Catalina Hariaga's book was published. Yeah, I mean, they were just, and the actual collective was, I know Juliana Spar was there because she's the one who selected Pragita's. I forget who the other people were, but it was not that many people. It was like 10 or 12 people. And then they just went in order. And then when the money ran, they kept paying. It was like a subscription, like, so other people were paying for the book you chose, and then you'd pay in for the others. And it was sort of like a collective model. I like that. I like what Alice James was at the beginning, which was the 7 people who were like, we'll publish each other's books and we'll take turns. And then as you published your book with Alice James, then you too became part of the collective, We each surrendered our royalties. So Sarah and I both, for our first books, we don't get royalties. We gave them to Alice James Poetry Collective. So every new book that is published by Alice James, we're helping to fund that automatically because our books, Matadora and The Farm Moss continue
yes
to sell, and that's what that's for. So I think maybe like models like that in publishing that actually involve community building.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing might be exactly what we were talking about, which was a publishing enterprise that has an arm that is a reading series, or it has an arm that is workshops and educational. I think probably the biggest mainstream example of that might be McSweeney's, but Tin House, I think also, they have a conference, then they publish books. So it's sort of, and then I think Tupelo does like a manuscript consultation conference, which I think is a little more, it's still like an elite model because you have to pay and then you have to travel somewhere, as opposed to the McSweeney's model, which is that's meant to be more accessible. So I think there's like lots of different ways that we can think about what publishing actually is. Is it just putting a book out and then it's like, we're done, unless, Oprah wants to choose your book, which is like amazing for one of my, Henri is a dear friend of mine. So I'm like, it's kind of, I'm now 1 degree of separation from Oprah finally after all these years. But maybe we are talking about a different kind of going back to those old collective models that the underground publishing was happening in the 70s with the communities that were, trying to get their work out, that were not being seen. as much, publishing, self-publishing. And that is also the forgotten history. I think there's one other thing I want to bring up actually, which I'll just throw it out there. I don't know if I'm sure we've all thought about it, but I do think that we as a community, like we have these elders that we don't honor, but we don't hold them up in a way. And there was a generation of writers who, Lawson Inada and Maxine, of course, but Kathy Song, Janice Mirikatani, Nellie Wong, great Bay Area poet. And I don't think we don't talk about them anymore. We don't teach their work. We don't hold them up. I think very few people do. Tim Yu at University of Madison, he still teaches Nellie Wong and he still teaches Janet Mirikatani. But that is sad to me in a way, is that we're always still about the new and the young, which is great. I mean, of course, yes, I want that, and to support our emerging writers and support our younger writers so much. Do I want that? But I also want people like Shrila Ray and Kathy Song, and even others who are younger than those, but Marilyn Chin or others. These are our legends. There are Wallace Stevens and there are, Anne Sextons. And so I don't want to see them be forgotten or go out of print and not be taught anymore and not be read anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of it for me.
That's beautiful. And I loved what you were saying about Subpress Collective, because we love those books. People read those books very avidly. I was like, and so
very low budget. I mean, they were not fancy books.
The work was so good, and I just thinking about like how maybe do we apply different models that maybe are surprising to us, like sort of this mutual aid model, or I'm thinking about how people of color across time since the founding of this country found different ways to survive and make a way for ourselves, like block parties, right? Like just I love that. And one thing that through Kundima, I'm just thinking about things like we don't have a lot of money, but just thinking about our networks across universities, students, teachers, artists, like how can we activate those people perhaps, and maybe just within your own community as well. So yeah, I'm grateful. Like, so, and Victory, Elda, what else as we close, like any like flashes of thought or ideas are coming to you? And Nancy says here, how can the average person support your work too, as well?
Support their own work?
Yeah, let's see. Do you mean the work of
like Nightboat, what we're doing? What all of what we're doing?
Oh, okay. Writers, how can the average reader
how can average people, your work, like as a writer, how can you, I think I understand. I mean, I agree with you, Sarah. I think there's a lot that we can do. Like some of us have more resources than others. And so I think it has to be commensurate to what resources you have. And I don't just mean money resources, but like access. And it can be formal or informal, like formal in the way of like, okay, I'm going to set up this thing. I'm going to do a salon at my house, or I'm going to do a something, or informal mentoring with people, like I sent out a call on Twitter, was like last summer or something. All the protests were going on at the moment. And I sent out this call. I said, I'm going to do professional development sessions on Zoom specifically for Black queer poets. And we'll do 20-minute sessions, and I'll answer any of your questions about publishing, about, applying for fellowships, how to write, whatever, all of that stuff. And I said, I'm not going to look at your work, and I'm not going to like do any editing or critiquing or help you figure out where to publish it. It's not part of it. It's just the rest of it is part of it. And it was amazing. And I had like probably 20 people answer. And I saw as many people as I could, and some, you know, trickled in, and it was super informal, and I just stay in touch with people after. It's fine. I mean, it's okay to do stuff like that. And I think I'll probably do it again. I think it's important, but I think it's even better if you build an institution. But like, I don't think you have to think of building an institution in this huge dramatic way, like founding a publishing company or founding a nonprofit organization. Just building an institution means like, you know, every Friday, every last Friday of every month, I'm going to have like a reading at my house, and I'm just going to invite people over, and we don't even have to read. It doesn't have to be a reading like the poet's going to be there, but like we're just going to read Asian American poetry to each other, or whatever, or Asian American writing to each other, or something like that, you know. And I think in the day of Zooms, it's like more potential because you can reach out to people, and like, you know, people will come and do stuff. There's a great weekly thing that happens like since lockdown called BIPOC Writing Party. It's actually happening right now. It happens on Monday nights. And it's just writing. It's just a writing prompt. Different person hosts it each time. And there's 2 prompts. And there's writing time where you just sit in front of your screen and write with everybody. And then a little bit of sharing time where there's some built-in time for people to share. And it goes 3 hours a night. It's been going since March 2020. It's still happening. And, you know, it's great. I hosted it once. They asked different people to host it. So Brian Talwara is hosting it tonight. And I don't know who else has been hosting it in the past, but I don't know. I think there's something that everyone can do. And if you have the energy, and if you have the resources to do it, and if you have the contacts, or you live in, you know, a community where you can't just go out on it. If you live in New York or San Francisco, fine, don't do this because there's something to go to every single weekend. But if you live in Wichita or Buffalo or San Diego, you know, it maybe something like this would be, you know, people would be really interested in it actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Kazim.
I'm so inspired. I feel like I'm with you all in person. This is just like a warm hug, which is really great. And I love the idea of these environments where people are not just focusing on one aspect of what it would be like to share your work, like big publishers, small publishers, but like investing in the writers themselves and sustaining them in like really deep work of seeing each other and creating community. I feel like these are all great pieces of advice. And I think that the power of the word, spreading the word, sharing with people that might not even be part of our community, recommendations from different presses, different organizations, you know, I think people are open to just kind of learning about them, and then maybe just there's a level of humility and understanding like communities are doing this right? And it's nothing to do with the big companies. And just let's observe and like enjoy that art and enjoy learning about that, what that good work is, and finding ways of being inspired and doing whatever you can, like a small act with another person, or just the generosity, Kazim, that you were saying is just amazing to think that that's like real help and just guidance and like, again, mentorship. So I think my takeaway is sometimes we kind of forget because we are isolated or because we're a little stressed out with our day-to-day jobs that we can grow this garden, right? And we're all part of it. We all deep down inside are so in love with what other people are writing and words. So like, how can we make sure that's in our week, like a little part, a day-to-day thing, and how are we connecting with other people?
Yeah.
Yes, I am like taking notes. I am like really excited and just feel a lot of joy at imagining these different possibilities and also knowing what's already happening, you know, like that this is happening as we're speaking, literally. And I think I love the idea of small spaces. I really resonate with the idea of reading our elders and respecting and honoring our elders and creating spaces where that work still is alive. Like, and I think that is one of the myths that book publishing perpetuates is like, there's a moment that a book comes out and it either succeeds or it doesn't, and then it kind of evaporates. And so like, what is the ways that books can live, that can keep living? I mean, I think Elda, you do so much of this work with Penguin Classics. It's just like, how do we like create longevity and and honor what has already been done, that we're not like recreating this. And then also the only other thing I'll say is what I so long for too is that writers have spaces like in Kundiman where they can go really deep and really honest and really weird. Like I just love the poets and writers of Kundiman are like, I just am like so in love. I am so in love with the writing that comes from the people who are a part of Kundiman and like the Asian American writing community in general. I am in love with the Asian American writing community. I think we are so weird. I think we are so brilliant, so creative, so like linguistically dexterous, so coming from a depth of history and struggle and resilience and transformation. So I just like, I'm all for whatever space we can be in where we don't have to clean ourselves up, present some kind of like uniform face to the world, right, where we don't have to be the number one, the successful, the like poster child, where we can just really get down into our like really deep, twisted humanness and like love each other for that and encourage each other to express that fully, get it down on paper, and then honor it for generations to come. That is my dream for us.
I got the chills. That was so beautifully said. Oh my gosh. Nancy has one last question as we close. How can we bring the Asian American community, maybe who doesn't know how to connect to Asian American writers, where can they start? A few things: the Asian American Writers Workshop, Kundiman, Penguin Classics has an amazing list, One World as well. I just saw it, forgive me, like my brain is so addled, but did Nightboat acquire Timeless Infinite Light?
Yeah.
So Timeless Infinite Light, like, and Nightboat doing incredible work, publishing amazing Asian American writers and other BIPOC writers as well. And so, yeah, where can they start? Also the Wikipedia page, they can start there too, because we've been working on that.
Poetry Foundation did a list also of Asian American writers that when it first came out was critiqued for its, some lack of inclusions, but they were, to their credit, were responsive to the community. And, people were writing in like, why should this person should be there? And they just started adding people and have made a stronger effort to make it into a more inclusive list. And they even have a statement, at least they did at one point have a statement about their commitment to continuing to expand that page if people want to add more writers. So that would be a place to start too, I think.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And it makes me think about Asian American Heritage Month, and maybe all of us who are writers, care about books, maybe during that month, just make a special effort to share and talk about Asian American books, like, not necessarily just the socials, but even just when you're having coffee with somebody, but to make an effort to do it. Because the vanishing is really there. We were shocked, and I'll end this with this last story and just talk about the urgency of this. We did a high school mentorship session at Kundiman, and a lot of the area schools here, they sent these beautiful Asian American, young people. One of them went to a really, really good private school here in New York, like sort of, fancy. The school didn't know there was an Asian American Heritage Month. And we're talking, this is Manhattan. Like, this is like
more somehow.
It's like they didn't even know there was an Asian American Heritage Month. So for us to do this work and to have this conversation, Nancy, thank you so much for providing a home for this conversation. And I agree with what so much, I feel really heartened. I was kind of discombobulated a little bit like tired, but I have like more energy now, which is really surprising to me. So just very grateful to all of you. Thank you, Nancy. Nancy, is there anything else that we need to do or say as we close? No. Okay. Okay. Excellent.
Chatting with you guys.
Yeah, I feel like it's like, you know, we're doing our fall beverage toast around our
Someday there'll be real beverages.
Yes.
real beverages. Please,
I
please,
look forward
please.
to it.
That would be wonderful. It's good to see all of you. Please take good care of yourselves, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you. I love the cover.
Lovely.
Looks awesome.
Amazing. Congrats, Kazim.
You need some reading later.
Yeah, when is your reading?
When is like the book release kind of?
Yeah.
It's kind of like I'm not really traveling, right? So I'm just doing Zoom events, but I'm going to, I'm doing like podcasts and stuff like that and media interviews more than like an actual reading. But I think there are some set up, and I'm actually going to Minneapolis before everything happened. Like this was like back in April, I said I would go. So I'm actually going to go in a couple weeks to Minneapolis for the Twin Cities Book Fair. But I think that's going to be my only in-person event.
That's so exciting.
I might do an in-person event here in San Diego, but I don't want to travel to do stuff anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Congratulations. I'm going to order a copy from my
me too.
Now listen, don't include this edit this part out, okay, what I'm about to say. But like before, when I was doing readings, I would get on a plane and fly off to like, I don't even know where, West Oklahoma, for like nothing. You know, they'd be like, well, we can pay you, blah, blah. And I'd be like, sure, I'll be there. I mean, after a year and a half in lockdown, just living in San Diego and not traveling, honey, my rate went up. I mean, because it's not going to, $1,000 to get on a plane and fly across the country. It's not going to work anymore. No, thank you. No, ma'am. I just put a 0 on that number. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. It's good to see you all. Take care. Looking forward to hopefully seeing you in person with real beverages soon.
Yes, that'd be so great.
Thank you. Great to see everyone.
It was so good to see you.